sorts of lies and mystery that you had no idea you would ever be subjected to. At first, we noticed our neighbors having problems with their water. We're talking about former dairy farms where now the water was black. People could not drink their water. When they fractured a well, when they worked on a gas well around their property, their water would turn black and plug the appliances up. And we began to fight a local fight that seemed like it was an isolated incident, and we were dealing with trying to exist on our property. That's the thing about this, is that it fractures communities. More than fracturing the earth and destroying the geology and the water and the air that we depend on, it fractures relationships and communities, and it makes people struggle to survive on the most basic level. When you don't have clean water in your home, when you don't have clean air to breathe, those are the most basic elements that we rely on, and we were fighting for those day in and day out. And the best thing that ever happened out of this was that we started to visit with other people, and we started to go around the country, and we realized that, much to our horror, we were not an isolated incident. I've since met people from almost every part of the world, including people I've just met in the past couple of days, that not only face the same things we have with the loss of use of our land, the loss of our health, the loss of our privacy, the loss of our water and air, but the loss of our democracy and the loss of people being able to make decisions about not only their own land, but what goes into your body, what you're subjected to when you drink water or take a bath or breathe air. And each time I meet a member from a community like that, whether it's an indigenous community in Australia, where I had the privilege of traveling, in Canada, in the United States, now I've got to meet people from Indonesia and Thailand this morning that are facing these same struggles. It makes me realize that the true power is not in government or in politics or in the gas and the coal and all the other extreme energies that they dig up out of the ground. The true, undisputable power in the world is the power of the individual to stand together with their fellow man and make a difference. And we've got leaders who stand and promise to do things for us. If you'll just vote for me, if you'll just donate money, if you'll support whatever party that I may be a part of, those are empty promises that are only meant to fill pockets and bank accounts. What we have to concentrate on is that if you want to know somebody who knows how a frack gas well works, who knows the impact of extreme coal extraction or tar sands extraction, or lives next to a former uranium mill tailing process, if you want to know what that does to someone or what that process is, ask the person who's been living next to it. Ask Ray Kimball about water in Pennsylvania. Ask Jeremy Buckingham, or one of the frontline people in Australia, about what happens when you mine coal seam gas in Australia and you have to live next to that. Those are the people that have the expertise. And combine that with the fantastic people who have education in writing and in speaking and in litigation and in all the talents that you see displayed on panels like this. You add the frontline community and the first-hand knowledge into something like that, then we talk about true power. That's what I've realized the most. From our small beginnings in Wyoming and feeling isolated, I've become a very small part of a large family that reaches around the world. And this is where we're going to end the extreme extraction and the extreme punishment of people who have to live next to this. And so to come here and to stand with everyone around the world is overwhelming for me, but I'm very honored, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, talk about anything that anyone would like to. Thank you for your time.
You're probably best known for your beautiful book, Living Downstream, about chemical exposure and cancer. And if anybody hasn't read it, I can't recommend it highly enough. but you're also the co-founder of Concerned Health Professionals of New York, who were so instrumental in winning the ban on fracking in New York. Thank you so much, and congratulations on that incredibly inspiring victory. Can you tell us a few reasons why you got involved in fracking and why people should care so much about this toxic technology?
So first of all, just to kind of share the good news a second time, the state of New York is unfractured. Our bedrock is not blown up. We made a decision to keep all of the mighty amount of methane that shale contains in the ground. So we have left it in the ground. And that was, and thereby hangs a tail. And I'll just tell a small part of it that I was involved in. And Winona has some other parts to tell. But it involved a cast of thousands. It was an opera, the anti-fracking movement in New York. It involved hundreds of organizations, and I played a small role in two of those. So instead of giving you a bird's eye view, I'll just tell you how it looked from my foxhole in the work that I was doing. So I'm a biologist, and I work in public health. What I know the most about is actually not climate change. That's what I do now, but rather toxicology. And so in 2009, I was asked by Cornell University to give a talk on fracking. And I was bewildered by the invitation. I wondered, I don't do energy, I said, so why was I being asked? And the answer was because the hosts wanted me to talk about the toxic chemicals that were used in the fracking fluid. So I began to research this, and it turned out they're chemicals I know very well. Many of them are human carcinogens. Some of them are endocrine disruptors. They have the power to interfere with our hormone signaling mechanisms at vanishingly small levels. Some of them are linked to heart attack and stroke risk and so on. Some of them sabotage human pregnancy. And so I was shocked that chemicals that are highly controlled in other settings could simply be poured down a hole in the ground, a hole that went so far down that it went right through our drinking water aquifers. And then the water in which those chemicals were suspended was going to be used as a plug under very high pressure to shatter the bedrock and in an uncontrolled way. All that sloshing chemical mixture plus the gas is going to come flying back up out of that same hole. I couldn't believe that was even possible. So that began my research interest, entree into fracking. But then not too long after that, I became interested in it as a mother as well as a biologist. When I woke up one day to learn that 40% of the land in my home county had been already leased to the gas industry, including parcels in my own village, including one at the end of the road, and so forth. Now, I have two children who I love more than life itself, one of whom has asthma. And that was just not going to happen over my dead body. It felt like it was my mother's job, not only my biologist's job, to address this issue. And not with any irony. The gas industry announced themselves in a quote in a newspaper to the people of New York. It said, and I can quote it verbatim to this day, "The shale army has arrived, resistance is futile." And suddenly their white trucks began showing up in our villages as they were testing and going around and so on. So about the same time then, now I believe before 2011, I became the lucky recipient of a Heinz Award, which is given to researchers for their work. So I was honored to receive this. And it came with a very nice check, $100,000, which in the world of oil and gas is nothing, but it's everything to me. It's the biggest check I ever got. And so I felt like, and in this moment, the best investment I could make was not to do the usual thing that researchers who get the Heinz Award do, which is to apply it to my research. I could have done research on fracking. I just wanted to stop it. I wanted to hit the pause button and stop fracking and then research it, because it felt to me that was the moral way to go about it. Get people out of harm's way first, and then do the research. And so I took my check and I gave it to Winona and some of Winona's friends, and she chipped the money in, and we had a few groups doing that. And then we began we started a statewide coalition, starting with 4 or 5 of the groups, right? And then by the time we won, we were 400 groups. And so we called ourselves New Yorkers Against Fracking, and our goal was to achieve a ban on fracking in New York. And so it was a David and Goliath fight, and we won. So how did we do that? Well, again, there are many parts to the story. I'm only going to tell you my part of it, and that doesn't mean it's the most important part, because what Bill said about old-fashioned organizing was a huge part of it. You know, I wasn't even involved in it. So we had regional organizers in every part of the state and so forth. The part that I was involved with was another little group we went off and founded called Concerned Health Professionals of New York, which is a group of doctors, nurses, a couple biologists, and researchers, a public health occupational specialist, and we began to read everything in the peer-reviewed medical literature that we could about the risks and harms of fracking, and then we translated it into plain English and said it before people. And we did this by writing a series of compendiums. So when we started, like in 2009, there were only about 60 papers in the peer-reviewed literature about the risks and harms of fracking. By the time we came out with our 3rd edition, which just came out this fall, there are now more than 500 such studies, the vast majority of which, between 85 and 88% of which show that there are risks and harms. And that includes to the climate. And that's the piece of this study I wanted to share with you. So we looked at impacts on pregnancy, impact on workers, impact on water, on radioactivity, on air. You can read it all in here. But we're gathered here to talk about the impact on the climate. So that's what I'm going to close with. In the meantime, I'm going to do something that's haven't seen done yet here at COP21. It's an old-fashioned show and tell. I'm going to actually pass around. Is right here, so you can easily get access to it. It's been translated into Spanish and Romanian so far, and I hope other languages to follow. ConcernedHealthNY.org. Or is it .com? Well, if you Google Concerned Health Professionals of New York, you will find it. What we determined through our study was that there is no regulatory framework that we could identify anywhere in the world that showed that fracking could be practiced without leaking methane into the atmosphere or into people's drinking water. In other words, it's inherently leaky. And it leaks from all parts of the extraction and distribution system, from the place where they're actually fracking it out of the ground, through the compressor station, massive spiderweb pipeline, all the way to the burner tip. It leaks. And you can't just be a plumber and go around and fix all the gaskets and valves. That's not the problem. The problem is far more unfixable. So to just explain one origin of the leaks, when you frack, you use water under very high pressure to smash bedrock a mile or more below our feet. When you do that, you create what geologists call a pressure bulge. So the shale actually explodes and turns into a football. It's called a football-shaped cloud of shale. Okay? So you've blown it apart, and now fragments with fracking fluid in it. And that pressure, because you've now made open spaces, increased volume. So doing that creates pressure that translates all the way back up a mile or more to the surface. And when you do that, you can mobilize methane that might be left over from coal mining operations that might be naturally occurring to travel along naturally occurring cracks and fissures, bubble into people's drinking water, or work its way up the soil and just enter the atmosphere. And that's what we see over and over again. And that's not an engineering problem that can be fixed. Furthermore, cement and steel well casings are not immortal substances. As they age, they get leakier. The cement well casing is not bonded to the parent rock, so as it ages and shrinks, it's like a straw that gets slightly smaller, right? And so then gas can bubble up around the outside of that straw. Moreover, as it cracks, and as other fracking operations torque it, you can get holes and fissures in the well casing itself. But even when you plug it at the end of the well's life, it goes on emitting. So each one of these wells is like a methane cigarette stuck into the earth. It just goes on smoking and smoking. Methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas, so that's one of the things that we've learned in the last few years that we didn't really understand very well when we started out. Methane is more short-lived than carbon dioxide, but it can trap 86 times more heat pound for pound than carbon dioxide. So in the short amount of years left to us to stabilize the climate and decarbonize, the lever that will work the fastest to lower temperatures is actually to control methane because it's so potent. If we had 100 years, if we had started in 1950 to solve this problem, I wouldn't say that. I would say let's go after carbon dioxide because carbon dioxide lasts for 100 years. But we don't have the luxury of time now, so we have to get on top of methane. So I guess the one piece of the science that I just, and I won't go into too much more of this, but I just want to make clear to you is that when we say carbon, when we say we have to decarbonize, leave carbon in the ground, have a carbon-free economy, that word carbon is not just the first name of carbon dioxide. Carbon comes in two flavors. Carbon dioxide, which is a combustion byproduct of burning fossil fuels, and also from our own exhalation and metabolism. But methane, which is an unburned vapor of carbon plus some hydrogens. And you know that the way that heat is trapped by these so-called greenhouse gases is that they happen to vibrate at a certain frequency, so that when they're struck by infrared radiation, they vibrate even more and they generate heat. And there's only two gases really in the atmosphere that can do that. It's not oxygen, which is necessary for life. Oxygen is not a greenhouse gas. It's not nitrogen. But it's methane and it's carbon dioxide. Those are the two flavors of carbon that can trap heat. And of the two, methane is carbon dioxide's younger and more dangerous brother. It can trap more heat, it lives fast and dies young. But we have to get a handle on methane if we're going to get a handle on the climate. So I'll end there and look forward to more conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm going to keep us moving quickly through so we can make sure to get lots of questions from the audience. Here's what we're going to do when we get to the end of the line. When Joaquin Turco is speaking, he's going to speak in Spanish and it will be simultaneously translated into English. So if you haven't taken a headset, please do take one when it's offered to you, and you'll need to put it on channel 3 when we get to Joaquin's thoughts. Sorry, channel 1, not channel 3. Winona, you founded Food and Water Watch about a decade ago, and fighting fracking is a huge part of what you now do. Food and Water Watch was also so key to the victory in New York, so congratulations and thank you to you as well. Will you just share a few quick thoughts with us about why fighting fracking is so central to your organization's work?
I'd love to, but first I'd really like to recognize all of the impacted people who've traveled from around the world to come and tell their stories here, because like John, a lot of people are living with fracking today and are on the front lines. Ray, other people, please stand so the reporters can recognize you. There are a lot of stories Please talk to these people, get their stories. We need to get this information out. They're at the head of a powerful movement. A movement that's growing. So the way the Food and Water Watch got involved is about 7 years ago, we started getting phone calls from members and people on the front line saying, you know, what are you doing? Why aren't you working on fracking? What is fracking? What's going on? It's having huge impacts on our water. And at that time, I don't think we thought about what the impacts would be on food today, which is what I want to end with. But we did know, because we work on the terrible agriculture policy in the United States. It's been deregulated. Family farmers can't make a living. And so it didn't surprise us that the oil and gas industry is moving into rural sacrifice zones. We did learn, of course, that there's some fracking going on in suburban and urban areas too. So by 2011, we were convinced that the technologies used in fracking are too dangerous, could not be regulated, and we needed to ban it. We need to keep fossil fuels in the ground and ban it. And I think that our contribution was helping to create the political space for saying that we need to ban fracking. Because I think what's happened in the environmental community, at least in the United States, is, you know, we had a lot of losses in the past, and so a lot of people were telling us in New York and other places that you could never go up against the oil and gas industry. The best we can do is regulate them. Well, happily, that has not proven to be the case, and there is a movement in many areas, and the areas where people are suffering from the effects of fracking. We need to really increase our movement to help those people who are suffering. We need to keep oil and gas out of the states. I'm speaking as somebody from the U.S. where there isn't fracking going on and should be banned. And we need to do what we can to stop permitting in other states and to make sure that the state forces the oil and gas industry to remediate those people's suffering. Now, I just want to end by talking about some of the effects on agriculture and food. And I think everybody in this room knows what climate chaos will do in the future to food production. We already have major food security issues that are related to climate change. Droughts, floods, chaotic weather, all the things that are happening. We know that 10 million people are facing famine in the next 12 months from chaotic weather. Those are official numbers. And this is going to get worse if we don't take real action to try to stop the increase in emissions. Now, there are real impacts happening on our food system today, though. And I just like to tell the story of California, because California not only produces a lot of food for the United States, it also produces a lot of food that's exported. If you're eating almonds here anywhere while you're in Paris, they're likely from California. So we all know that fracking, because it uses millions of gallons of water, the average is 6. In Texas, it's up to 13 million gallons. In Michigan, even 21 million gallons. A lot of water. We know that fracking releases a lot of brines and poisonous materials from deep underground that comes up to 70%. Well, California has been facing a record drought, also a result of climate change, most likely. And so we have found out that fracking wastewater is being soaked in walnut shells. A lot of walnuts are grown in California, being mixed with fresh water and used to water agricultural crops in the Central Valley of California. I'm not making this up. It was actually documented. The Los Angeles Times has written about it. And sadly, Governor Jerry Brown, who is being praised and fawned over at this climate talks, who's supposed to be a climate hero, not only is he facilitating the oil and gas industry to see Governor Brown, if you're writing an article, get more information about what's happening with this situation in California. There are other impacts as well. I just want to end with one story. And maybe Ray Kimball in the front row here can talk to you about it. There's a lot of fracking going on in his part of Pennsylvania, northeastern Pennsylvania. Well, Pennsylvania, that part of Pennsylvania, is suffering from a dying dairy industry. Cargill, one of the companies that has the worst agricultural practices in the world, has a very large slaughter plant there where they grind up dairy cows and send them to fast food restaurants. It turns out that a lot of dairy cows are getting sick from fracking waste, polluting drinking water, the air pollution that's going on there. And anecdotal evidence is a lot of those cows are going to the Cargill facility. So if you visit the United States, the lesson is here, don't eat any junk food hamburgers. But just to end in an upbeat way, I think that Bill was exactly right. We have a mighty fracking movement. It's growing. It's doing climate work. We can be successful. We can keep fossil fuels in the ground when we all work together collectively. And that's what this part of these ridiculous police-studded climate talks can be used for, is solidarity and the networking, because let's go home and hold our elected officials accountable.
Beth Van Tongeren, Vice President of the Green Left Group in the House of Representatives of the Dutch Parliament. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you could share some opening remarks, and in particular, if you could share with us the state of play of the Dutch moratorium against fracking.
Yes, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being all here in this room. I was wondering who was here actually. I think some of you are already anti-fracking activists. I think probably there's some scientists here. And maybe there are also, like myself, I'm one of those hated elected officials in Parliament. I don't know if there's other politicians here that are also working very hard against fracking and keeping fossil fuels in the ground, so we know who we're talking to. In 2010, I was approached by a very nice man at a meeting, and he said, they're starting a fracking well at the bottom of my garden. And I said, and he said, you've probably never heard of it. I said, I've worked for Greenpeace, so I know what fracking is, but they do that in the United States, and not in Europe. So you must be misinformed, it's probably something to do with gas extraction. And he had the whole thing sorted out on a nice USB stick for me already there. And I said, I'm new for the Green Party in Parliament, but if you can get some local residents together, I will have a go and see what I can do in Parliament. I'm new there, I'm not quite sure how it works yet, but let's see how far we go. And he not only managed to get a few local residents together, he and some of them are here, with other people set up a Dutch-wide network of local councils, local people, scientists, but we also had unusual alliances with the beer breweries in the Netherlands, and that was one of our deciding factors, because to have a good image of your beer, you need clean water, and if you have fracking, even if the actual contamination isn't proven, it makes the beer less attractive. It's not a natural product anymore, there might be chemicals in it, and we've just heard from the panelists what the problem might be. So when the beer brewers came on board, I thought we might have a chance to beat the third and fourth largest companies in the world. The Netherlands might make a lot of noise, but we're actually a tiny little country. And to take on the third and the fourth biggest companies in the world is quite something. So we started having hearings and agendaing it. I went to the UK to learn from the people there. We got some scientists on board that gave us good information. And to my own surprise, I must admit that I thought that the only way to do it was by external organising and putting pressure on it. But I got a parliamentary majority to say, let's first maybe research this a little bit before we start putting more wells in the Netherlands. So we got a small postponement. And then we got it together with residents, but also through my political party, the Greens. We have 400 municipalities in the Netherlands, and we got around 300 of those to sign, to pass a motion in their council saying no fracking in our area. We're also organised in provinces. We got 10 out of our 12 provinces to say no fracking in our provinces. We thought, yes, thank you, that was quite an effort. And then we thought, okay, now Quadrilla, the fracking company, will give up and our minister will give up. But as you have experienced in the States, they just kept on coming. They wanted to start lawsuits. They're still saying the Netherlands can't do without this fossil fuel. We've got way too much energy generation in the Netherlands for our own needs. This had to come out of the ground. And we got our moratorium. We're fighting for it about every 6 months to maintain it. And we've had it for 5 years now, but again, in about 2 weeks our minister's coming with his energy vision, which we're dreading because we think it will not be a clear path. What we need in all European countries, in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, in the States, a vision that moves quickly towards clean energy, but inspired by the COP and inspired by all you here present and what I'm able to bring back to the Netherlands. We're going to fight to keep this moratorium and stop further fossil fuel exploration in the Netherlands.
Thank you so much, everyone. We're just switching seats here because Joaquin Turco will share some PowerPoint slides with you. If you don't have your headset on, you're going to want to turn your headset on. Turn it to channel 1 for the simultaneous translation. And Joaquin, more and more our movement recognizes the need for a just transition, that it's not just about reducing carbon emissions, but about how we reduce them. But bringing together Greens and Labor isn't always easy, and the Argentine Workers' Central Union Autonomous is such an inspiration to us as one of the first unions to endorse a ban on fracking. Thank you so much for that. Can you share with us a little of the story of how you decided to take that position and why?
Gracias. Bueno, es difícil. Primero, gracias por invitarme. Es bastante difícil congeniar esto de estar luchando contra el fracking siendo un trabajador, porque los trabajadores somos hijos del petróleo, del carbón. Pero hay cosas que están primero, hay prioridades. Yo les voy a contar más o menos un poco cómo nace nuestra central y por qué estamos acá. La CTA es una central de trabajadores que decidimos enfrentar el fracking, y en realidad todo comienza en los años 90 en Argentina, cuando se implementan las primeras políticas neoliberales. Allá decidimos formar una central nueva justamente para combatir estas políticas neoliberales, construir un nuevo modelo sindical y construir un modelo de sociedad distinto, con justicia social, democracia participativa. ¿Se escucha? No al fracking es parte de una lucha que estamos desarrollando, parte de una lucha más amplia que la CTA viene desarrollando en defensa de los territorios, el agua, el suelo, contra la depredación de los bienes comunes, por la transformación de nuestra matriz energética y el control social de la energía. Estamos convencidos básicamente que no hay trabajo en un planeta que está muerto. El fracking, los primeros cursos de fracking se realizaron en 2012 en un área que tienen, para que se den una idea, la superficie de Irlanda. Es un área demasiado grande. Y con esto se da una nueva vuelta de tuerca a las políticas neodesarrollistas de Argentina. Se empiezan a intervenir los territorios, el extractivismo sigue avanzando y empezamos a observar los primeros impactos ambientales. Inmediatamente surgió nuestra resistencia, pero la resistencia no solo de los trabajadores, sino que la primera resistencia fue de las organizaciones territoriales, las comunidades mapuches, los pueblos originarios, junto con los vecinos autoconvocados, con estudiantes y los pequeños productores también que estaban afectados, los pequeños productores de fruta, que estaban afectados por la actividad. Como respuesta, el poder político y las empresas montaron una estrategia comunicacional para tratar de estigmatizar la lucha y, bueno, justificar el despojo, básicamente. Entonces estamos construyendo un modelo y un movimiento anti-fracking que lo basamos en tres ejes: la defensa de los derechos de las comunidades locales, enfrentar los impactos ambientales de la actividad y básicamente completar la soberanía energética, ¿no?, de nuestro país. ¿Y cómo lo hacemos? Bueno, lo principal es organizarnos. Somos trabajadores y de esto conocemos bastante. Básicamente organizarnos rápidamente, diseminar materiales, hacer acciones directas a través de medios digitales, estar con otros, discutir con nuestros aliados, promover un nuevo modelo de desarrollo con transición justa, con justicia social, trabajo digno, distribución de la riqueza y democracia. Hemos promovido proyectos de ley para prohibir el fracking. En la actualidad, esta movilización y esta presión a los políticos ha permitido que más de 45 municipios se declaren libres de fracking en Argentina. Y además lo que estamos haciendo es tratando de promover expresiones culturales y artísticas, como películas, exposiciones, ensayos, para transmitir el mensaje, porque a veces desde las grandes ciudades eso no se ve, eso está muy al sur y afecta a unos pocos. Entonces, en la presentación hay un par de links a largometrajes y documentales. Algunos están traducidos al inglés, inclusive. Otros son de una institución muy importante, se llama Observatorio Petrolero Sur, que está haciendo un trabajo de esclarecimiento muy importante en Argentina. Inclusive, bueno, hay una foto de un director de cine que se llama Pino Solanas, que es senador de Argentina y presentó proyectos anti-fracking, una ley alternativa de energías renovables, que, bueno, logró que el Papa pose con la remera de no a la fracturita. Finalmente, como nosotros decimos, unidad en la acción, ¿no? Estamos luchando por un nuevo modelo energético más limpio y sobre todo con control social. Y nos estamos conectando con organizaciones regionales, con organizaciones de países vecinos, de Uruguay, de Brasil, y con organizaciones internacionales, ¿no? CTA es parte de un movimiento, de un colectivo que se llama Sindicatos por la Democracia Energética, que agrupa 47 centrales y sindicatos de 17 países que están luchando contra el fracking. Bueno, porque nosotros entendemos, ¿no?, que si bien algunos no están directamente en contra del fracking, sino están trabajando en moratorias, nosotros tenemos que unir esfuerzos, reforzar las coincidencias y ir caminando las diferencias. Gracias.
Thank you so much to all of our incredible panelists. I'm only going to ask a question or two, and then we will open it up to questions from the audience. So for any or all of our panelists, would anyone like to say a few words about how you see the role of faith movements in the work to ban fracking and keep fossil fuels in the ground, and any thoughts on how faith communities can become even more involved as we go forward in the aftermath of this Paris COP on all of this important work? Thanks so much.
Do you want to? Well, the faith community is stepping up in places in Pennsylvania, helping to deliver water. The faith community is a real part of campaigns in a number of locations around the U.S., campaigns to ban fracking, places like California, in Colorado. I mean, I think especially in light of the Pope's encyclical and his call on policy leaders not to allow trading schemes to solve environmental problems, that we'll see more and more efforts by the faith community to get involved in these issues. And I know at Food and Water Watch we want to work closely in the different communities where we're supporting partners to, if they're not already involved, to do outreach to the faith community, because it's really incredibly important that we get more constituencies involved in this mighty movement.
En Argentina, en la provincia de Neuquén, el papel de la Iglesia Católica es muy importante porque justamente es uno de los colectivos, es uno de los grupos que están trabajando contra el fracking directamente. El obispo Neri está siguiendo el legado de otro gran obispo que se llamó Jaime de Nevares, que fue un obispo muy combativo. Bueno, la Iglesia está trabajando directamente, está implicada en la lucha antifracking. La Iglesia Católica.
John?
I would like to approach this maybe from a little different perspective, in that maybe as a result of colonization, whether European or American, that has gone around the world for the last several centuries, we tend to overlook traditional native religions and spirituality. And I'm honored that I grew up on the Wind River Indian Reservation in the state of Wyoming, where the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapahoes live. And the type of faith practiced by many indigenous people instills a very deep respect and understanding for land and for water and for the things that we depend on. And I think that all of us could benefit by making ourselves more aware of indigenous cultures and the suffering that they have been under because of these extreme extractive practices, and try to understand and gain knowledge from them, because there's so much there that we're overlooking, and it's a faith that's based in nature, and I believe we can only go right by listening to that.
Coincido contigo, digamos, en el sur nuestro, las comunidades mapuches, que son los pueblos originarios, fueron siendo llevados hacia la actual zona de Loma de la Lata, de Vaca Muerta, porque eran parajes desolados donde no había nada. Y ahora justamente que la misma civilización los llevó hacia allí, ahora los quieren sacar porque se dieron cuenta que hay un elemento que le sirve a la civilización occidental. Y realmente el ejemplo que nos están dando los mapuches en la defensa del territorio y en el desarrollo sustentable, realmente, porque el desarrollo que no es el desarrollo que dicen los libritos de Río, sino el desarrollo que preserva la cultura, que preserva los pueblos originarios, los saberes ancestrales. Ellos nos están dando un gran ejemplo. De hecho, una dirigente de una comunidad mapuche que resistió la entrada del equipo de perforación fue en un principio acusada de intento de asesinato, ¿no? Y bueno, ahí salió toda la comunidad a apoyarla. Pero la idea es cómo estas comunidades, en el fondo, como con toda esa sabiduría, nos pueden dar un ejemplo a nosotros que vemos la cuestión europeizada, al menos de la forma occidental, ¿no? El ejemplo de los mapuches y de otros pueblos originarios que en Argentina también están luchando contra el extractivismo en otras zonas, contra la mega minería, las grandes represas, es un ejemplo para todos. Mucho antes que el Papa lanzara la encíclica y que nos pongamos a hablar de desarrollo sustentable, ¿no?
Thank you so much for all of those good thoughts. If you have a question in the audience, please raise your hand. Why don't we start here in the front? And we may have some microphones. Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Catherine Spovic. I'm from the United States. And I just want to say that both Sandra and Winona were absolutely indispensable in our victory over fracking. Sandra Steingraber was at every single rally we had in Albany, and Winona with Food and Water Watch. Food and Water Watch organized locally. Eric Weltman, we had bus trips up to Washington, we had up to Albany, we had rallies, we had petitions, we bird dogged Governor Cuomo every time we knew he was going to be somewhere. We were there with our signs. And even though we knew we were up against it, there was always a feeling that we are not going to stop until this happens. And there was some kind of, what was it that we signed? We each signed a commitment that we would do whatever it would take to not let this go through. So I just want to say that persistence and not accepting the alternative, but to just keep going no matter what and winning was what helped us have this victory. And I would like to extend that to John and all his good work, and also Ray, and also there's a person by the name of Josh Fox, a filmmaker who made Grassland. And this film did so much to educate people as to what fracking was. He won an Academy Award for the documentary. So I'm glad to hear that you have a film. I believe you said Joaquin is being made in your country, and the arts can really get the word out. So I just want to thank all of you for being here. And my question is, what is the one thing that kept you going through this struggle?
So it's really important, well, let me back up a bit. So the little piece that I played was to translate science for people, but then people needed something to do with it, right? Because if they just read all the harms of fracking, then you just feel depressed, and depression doesn't really lead to the kind of stubborn action that you're talking about. And so one of the things that we gave people to do, as you might remember, was to write comments to Albany. But instead of creating simply petitions that you just click and don't even read, we actually challenged people to write their own unique comment. And we laid the science out for them in words that they could understand, and invited them to follow the breadcrumbs and piece it together and put their own sentences together in their own unique comment and send that in. And in that way, we actually directed 260,000 comments to Albany. on fracking over the years, which was far more by magnitudes than had ever been submitted on any other topic. And at one point, we sent in so many comments that we actually buried the draft regulations under the sentences of citizens. We delivered them in a U-Haul trailer along with Yoko Ono. And they couldn't get through all the comments before the deadline elapsed. So that actually helped buy us a lot of time. So the question is like, how do you convince people to do that, right? And at one point, our comment period the 8 days of Hanukkah, the 12 days of Christmas, and New Year's Eve. And people did it. They actually had comment writing parties as part of their New Year's Eve parties. And women that, would organize coffee comment writing parties at their church and things like that. So I think the one thing that we provided people was a sense of hope. That even though this was a David and Goliath fight, we know how that turned out. David had sustainable technology in the form of a slingshot and actually slayed the giant. And so we really wanted people to feel heroic, that they were playing a part in a heroic tale. And so my ideas about how to prevent going from denial straight into despair, as Pope Francis has warned us against, and rather stand up and fight for life itself, takes a number of forms. And so I always encourage people to figure out what their own basis for hope is, because to sustain the kind of battle that we did for as long as we did and to give ourselves completely over to it. I mean, we had people who took out second mortgages on their home so they had cash to get on the bus to come to Albany. I mean, we felt like we were fighting for life itself. So to do that, you have to sustain hope. And so what I tell people is you need to find hope in 3 places, and you need to do it on a regular basis. One is to find hope within your own personal history. Who are you? What kind of family do you come from? What stories of hope do you have? And in my particular case, I had cancer when I was 20. And so those were some pretty dark days. But when you're diagnosed with cancer, you don't just say, oh, well, I have cancer, well, we all have to die, so, I'm not going to have hope. In fact, every person with cancer, no matter how difficult their prognosis, they develop a fighting spirit and have some kind of hope and do the best they can. And that's what we need to bring. So I often try to tap into part of my personality. I'm also adopted, and my mother had cancer at the same time I had. I grew up in coal country in downstate Illinois, and my mom and I were co-cancer patients together. I was 20, she was in her mid-40s. My mom had a far worse prognosis than I did. And her slogan was, don't let them bury you until you're dead. And that also became something I thought a lot about during the fracking fight. So I'm sure all of you have in your own family some story. My dad fought against Hitler, and that was he was up against German panzer tanks as a German-American 18-year-old. So he has his own stories that became important to me during the fracking fight. And then, in addition to our own personal families and our own personal experience with grave we also have a culture that we belong to and a history that we belong to that are also full of stories that are really useful. And David and Goliath is one. For me, the civil rights story with Martin Luther King Jr. is really important, as is the women's suffrage movement in the United States, which some of the major battles took place only 30 miles from where I live now. So Susan B. Anthony and some of our big heroes of that struggle fought for 80 years for the right for women to vote, went to jail, had to get very politically sophisticated. It looked like they would never see the day. And so I read their stories, and it buoys me up. And then, I search for these all the time. I'm always looking for new ones. So this morning, sort of in preparation for today, I went out running in the Tuileries Garden, right next to the Louvre, which is where my hotel is. looking for signs of hope, and I found them in the statuary in the garden, which are full of statues like Hercules, made of marble from 1670, and he's so destroyed by air pollution from fossil fuel exhaust that his genitals are missing now, and his fingers are gone. But he's standing there exhausted from, remember Hercules had to do 12 almost impossible tasks, Herculean labor. So he's standing there absolutely exhausted, but his muscles are still tense, and he's ready to do the next one. And so I just stood there and thought that this is the moment that we find ourselves in this planet, which is we have to do a Herculean task. We are all called upon now to be Hercules and do amazing labor that we didn't think we could do. But that's what our culture tells us, that our best stories are all about heroes that go through terrible crises and take risks and vanquish foes far bigger than themselves because they're more clever, or because they're more compassionate, or because they are able to outfox whoever this unvanquishable foe might be. So today I happen to find it in the Tuileries Garden. Sometimes I find it in the banks of Seneca Lake, where right now while we're talking, I happen to know there are 18 people lining up. It's very early in the morning now. They're lining up in the driveway of a fossil fuel company in the form of a Texas company named Crestwood, who seeks to store fracked gas in these abandoned salt caverns underneath and beside a lake that is a source of drinking water for 100,000 of us. So even though we can't frack in New York, we can still, it's still legal to bring in billions of gallons of frack gas and try to store it next to us. And so far, more than 400 people have been arrested. There are people that may be being arrested right now. I'll have to check my emails since we're done here and see what they're. Every time I go out and stand with them, they include people as young as 18, and our oldest arrested was 93. And I find hope and courage in action. So taking action every single day, I think, makes your own hope. So that's the message I bring to students when I teach, but it's also the message I brought when I worked as a biologist in communities with people, helping them understand the science and helping them find their place in this big movement.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you. So we're starting to run a little short on time, everybody. So what I would like to do is take 3 questions or so as quickly as you can, and then we'll have our panelists address them as they're able in the remaining time that's available to us. I also want to say again, we have an action at the front of the conference center by the flag pillars, right where you get off the bus. And I apologize for my extreme rudeness, but I am the permit holder in contact with the French police. So at 2:45, I need to literally run out of here and get over there so that we do be able to keep our right to gather and have some wonderful, wonderful grassroots and frontline activists giving some remarks and hopefully talking to some journalists. So please, everyone, forgive me for running out the door. Thank you to our panelists, and let's get 3 really quick questions.
Thank you. I'm Stephen Sondheim from the Sierra Club in the United States. I'm appalled by the fracking, and I want to ask a question about the regulatory environment. In the United, this is very simple, but in the United States, I understand you have to break the rules before you're regulated. And I understand that in Europe you have to prove, this is all simple, you have to prove safety before you're allowed. And I'm disturbed. I ran into a French woman who's probably here who talked about fracking is not legal in France, but it's going ahead anyway. So I just wanted to raise that, and I think that Europe should fight like hell to stop it.
I'm Bobby from South Africa, and we work with the community in the Karoo who are fighting fracking. And for me, the fracking story is more than just fracking, it's about land. And it's about how does one redistribute the land amongst the indigenous people from those that have taken the land so that there's a joint ownership of that land and a joint protection. Now for me that's the important thing, and it seems to be in America, in the United States I should say, there might be some understanding of that. But I think it's a big challenge in South Africa to be able to understand that to protect the land, you have to have joint ownership of the land, and I would like to comment on that. The second thing I would like to very quickly ask is that Bill walked out of here and he said, this piece of paper might be a bit better than the last piece of paper. I say this piece of paper is not going to be better than the last piece of paper, and more critically, is that we have all the evidence of that. And what are we going to do when Friday comes and we don't get a deal, or we get a deal that is completely rubbish? Are we going to continue fighting at the UNFCCC level, or are we going to do what those guys do there, fight at a local level?
My name is Bobby Ricky. I come from Seattle. I've had book groups. I'm raising Elijah. Thank you, Senator. My question is about trade agreements. Right now there's one in Congress, the TIPP, which is the Asian trade agreement, but there's also one normally with Europe, and it's going to give corporations even more rights than NAFTA did. So all of that hard work could be undermined. Do you have any advice for those of us fighting those trade deals? Thank you.
Thank you for those great questions, and panelists, please jump in any order you'd like.
I wanted to address the land ownership issue, because this is something that no matter where in the world you come up, because the powers that be have displaced the people that were on the land. And now we're seeing that in the second, third wave, where people like myself, who white, live in the middle of the country in the United States, fairly isolated, are getting a very small taste of what it's like to be treated like you're just something to be swept aside because whoever has the power at the time wants what you're on. And I don't know that, I'm going to give you my simple perspective from what I see. In order to start that, in order to get back where we share this land and where the rightful owners have, we have to acknowledge each other. There has to be some basic acknowledgement that no matter what our skin color, our culture, the language we speak, we have to acknowledge the commonality that we have and the things that we all need to survive. And I think whether people want to admit it or not, we don't like to do that. We don't like to say that I'm white or whatever the case may be, and accept the differences between people and work on what we can actually fix together. Where I live, the Indian reservation is split east to west by the river called the Wind River. And the state of Wyoming basically doesn't acknowledge the north half of the reservation because that's where all the oil and gas activity takes place. And if they supposed to look after, they need to be removed as quickly as they can be. And so that's where we have to get back to standing together and being unified. And for me, we talked about what keeps us going and what inspires us. That's it. I grew up very isolated. My state has 500,000 people, period. The town I live in is 100 people. This movement, the things that have happened to me have allowed me to go into the world and realize I'm not different, and the people that I didn't understand are not different. We put up false barriers, we put up walls to keep ourselves different. And maybe I'm getting away from what your question is, but to me, we have to start by tearing those false barriers down. You have to be willing to talk to people and to listen and to accept that we're never going to see exactly eye to eye because we're all individuals, and that's fine to accept those differences, but the falseness and the barriers that we throw up just so that we can keep one person in power or one group in power are the first things that we have to eliminate. And that's why it's so important to work with frontline communities and people who are directly impacted by this, because people don't learn about this because they set out to know what hydrofracking was or what climate change is. It's because it's now essential to their existence. They have to educate themselves. And part of that educating themselves is to educate yourself about your fellow man. And to me, that's the most important thing. That's the thing that will help solve more problems than anything is to simply come together and speak with one voice.
Well, I'll say just a little bit about the trade agreements, because we've been working very hard with Food and Water Watch as part of the Citizens Trade Campaign, which is a very broad-based campaign with labor, environmentalists, social justice groups that work on poverty, because what we've had to do is divide up the members of Congress. You know, we missed by one vote on fast-track authority. Came very close. In fact, it was pretty amazing that we got that close. Now we're all working very hard to hold senators accountable when this trade agreement comes up for a vote, because we know what these trade agreements are. They're basically trading away our democracy. And we already have seen a U.S. Oil and gas company is suing Quebec over their moratorium, and that's under the North America Free Trade Agreement. The trade agreement that we're fighting now also has this investor-state piece of it, which gives corporations the right to sue municipal governments, state governments, and the federal government. And sadly, this is a problem, at least in the U.S., that we have with both parties. There are elected members of both parties that support this neoliberal free trade agreement. So I kind of see all of these battles wrapped up together. We need to really hold responsible those people that we elect. And as we go into this election cycle in the U.S., and even though this is an audience that has people from all over the world, I think we all recognize that the U.S. has a lot of bad influence. U.S. Policy has a lot of bad influence across the globe, and we really need to try in this election coming up to hold the people who are going to be the candidates for office, Democrats as well as Republicans, accountable for their position. And until that day, we are not going to be able to have the wins that we need. And we need to do that with this kind of local grassroots organizing. Let me just end by saying something about the commons. I think part of the organizing that we have to do is around the commons, and the idea that we all live here on Earth, we all share these resources. I don't know about you, I'm mad as hell that a small group of corporations and their shills across the world are ruining our planet, ruining the resources and the way of life that our children and grandchildren are going to have to face. And I think we need to do everything possible that we can today and for the rest of our lives to stop this. And that's what gives me hope. Our movement gives me hope, because we can beat these bastards, right?